Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim, divine attributes, and in Arabic, Al-Asmaa Husna, a brief appraisal. So today we will introduce this topic, and then in subsequent presentations we'll go through some of these divine attributes very briefly. These are the references. Some of the excerpts have been taken from the Human Self and Allah, and there is one taken from Islam, a challenge to religion. And this is our contact for any query or question regarding this presentation or any of our previous presentations. Now, over here we start with a schematic on progressing to the Quran. And the part of it we had shared sometimes back, but I have slightly amended it to suit today's presentation. And over here there is a crowd totally oblivious of the purpose of life, political arena, and these are very common in third world environment, political tamasha, vote collection of masses, and then is religious congregation, emotive contentment. So these things we observe in the world, and if we look at the Quran, then we come to this conclusion that humanity needs some kind of guidance. And that guidance, if it comes from the Quran, the world face will change. And the next part is some individuals who think and reflect refuse to be part of the crowd or grow out of the crowd. They are dissatisfied with the state of affairs but don't know what to do. And this is a crucial question. And Quran points to it and says, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. That is, you should first reject the man-made system. And obviously, to reject the man-made system, human beings should start thinking. And there are always few at the beginning. So one should not be discouraged. This is the way gradually the Quranic guidance comes to mankind. Next is some of them come to the Quran and through their intense focus and inner drive. And that is important, that once we have come to the Quran, then we should be fully focused once we have understood it and if it appeals to us. Find an answer to their questions, they delve into it, read it, and analyze it. And some of them then come across Tolu Islam and the books by Allama Parvez, and Deen as a system emerges. And this is what happens. If we talk to a number of members of Tolu Islam, many of them have been to elsewhere and talked to various other people, listened to other people, and when they felt dissatisfied, then they gradually or slowly or by chance came to Tolu Islam. And the next part is they progress in knowledge, acquire Iman and strengthen it with solid deeds. So it's a progressive, slow process initially, and it takes time. That is why one should never be impatient. What one should be is to stay steadfast. Strongly desire the system of Deen, reject the man-made systems, and are moved by the plight of humanity at large. And that is an important point, that people who come to the Quran should have compassion for wider humanity, and they should be moved by the state of particularly yatim and miskin in the world and people who are being exploited. This is where they experience inner change, i.e. through Iman. Next slide is, why do we need some belief system in life? What I did was that to put these thoughts together, I sought the help of DeepSeek. And it was quite interesting, some of the points which I found over there. The human need for some kind of belief system is fundamental as part of our cognitive construct. Most people have some religious belief of a God, and all these concepts are at variance with each other when we go into their details. And this is very interesting because under the religious domain, these concepts are very personal and they do not conform to each other. And that is why the divisions and sects appear. We wish to have some meaning and purpose of our life. Humans have a natural desire to understand their place in the universe. Belief systems provide narratives that explain existence, suffering, destiny, and offer a sense of purpose. Next is religions, philosophies, and even secular worldviews. For example, humanism or scientific view help people make sense of life's big questions. And that is another, people do think about these things, and a lot of discussions are also held, a lot of lectures are given, and if you go to YouTube, we'll find a lot of material to support this kind of information. Belief can offer solace in times of uncertainty, grief, or fear. And we know Quran also points to it, that you start praying and doing supplications when you are in trouble. Faith in a higher power, karma, or an afterlife can reduce existential anxiety. And these things don't go beyond belief system. These don't bring any solid, concrete change in people. These are just ideas. These stay as beliefs. Rituals and prayers provide psychological comfort by creating a sense of control or connection to something greater. For example, belief of taqdeer or fatalism leads to not taking full responsibility for one's own actions. And this is important. If we look at people who have this belief of taqdeer, they will never be fully committed to any task, particularly of serious nature, and underlying they will have this kind of fatalism that it is Allah or God who is going to sort it out. Many belief systems establish ethnical frameworks that guide behavior because people tend to have that belief which suits them as a group, fostering cooperation and social cohesion. The next slide is also continuity of the same. Shared beliefs create a group identity, strengthening communities through common values and traditions, and all these values are mostly relative values. Some think that humans are pattern-seeking creatures, predisposed to detect agency and intention in the world. For example, attributing natural events to gods, spirits, metaphysical deities. Evolutionary psychology proposes that belief in supernatural punishment or reward may have prompted pro-social behavior, aiding survival in early societies. It is still prevalent. If there is some kind of natural disaster somewhere, people still tend to relate it to their concept of God rather than looking at the laws working behind these destructions or behind these natural events. Beliefs often inspire hope, motivating people to persevere through hardship. And that doesn't mean that these beliefs are going to solve any problem, but people tend to overcome some situation, for example, death, unexpected death of someone, and as a result, there is a grief, and supplications and belief of fatalism helps them to overcome that immediate emotive difficulties. The idea of divine help, destiny, or collective progress can fuel resilience. Political and ideological beliefs, for example, democracy, socialism, or nationalism, drive social movements and change. And we know it that people who do not have any concept of God, they are very much committed to the political systems. Belief systems can buffer against the fear of death. Concepts like an immortal soul, reincarnation, or legacy provide psychological relief from mortality. And legacy over here means that through their progeny, they think their life will continue in the future. Cultural beliefs help humans manage the anxiety of being finite. Some argue that belief can be irrational or lead to conflict. For example, religious wars, dogma. And there is people who are particularly have secular kinds of beliefs. They think that religious wars are created by religion, not realizing that it is a big power show and there are other forces which are taking advantage of these belief systems. They say that secular alternatives, for example, science, art, humanism, can fulfill similar needs without reliance on the supernatural. And all of this is because people do not know the purpose of their own creation and if they have a self and if that self can be developed. And this is where Quran comes to our help. The next slide is the word of 2025. We have gone through all these points previously as well, but just to set the scene for today's presentation, I thought to go through some salient points. The word of 2025 is created by the unbridled human intellect, and it displays all the weaknesses and flaws towards which the Quran has drawn our attention from beginning to end. Some of these are highlighted here. So we should always keep in mind, as students of the Quran, the word which we see around us as of today is created by that human intellect which is not guided by the Quran. And unguided minds, that is, those not guided by the Quran, will always end up creating similar words. The existing belief systems across the world have failed to provide peace and security and freedom from fear and grief. So freedom from fear and grief is the hallmark of the system of Deen. There is fasad, which means there is imbalance, injustice, and bloodshed across the globe in various regions. For example, Ukraine war, Middle East conflict, civil war in South Sudan, civil wars in various other parts of Africa. And the list is very long, and we can Google it and find out unending list of problems in the world. Sanctions on various countries imposed by the West, that is, anyone who is powerful wants to subjugate others. And this is true from individual to collective level at the top. A continuous state of economic uncertainty, mass surveillance, absence of even basic human rights, ineffective UNO, and all these are some of the signs which we can see how human intellect, which is not guided, is going to create a world like that. And if we are not happy with that, dissatisfied with that, the Quran presents its guidance for us. Creation of yatim and miskeen in the world in every country, and yatim and miskeen we know means all those who are left alone, who are, despite in a full world, feel alone and feel subjugated and enslaved. All man-made systems create inequality and imbalances, and that is the bottom line. Gap between rich and poor, concentration of wealth in a few hands. Man-made laws in every country which create all kinds of injustices and imbalances. These laws are based on relative values and keep changing, thus creating uncertainty and fear. And the question which can arise in our mind at an initial stages of studying the Quran is, why should I know it? My life is going on fine and I am a beneficiary of the system. But if we have a desire to learn that system, which is called Deen in the Quran, then we need to contrast it with the man-made system, because that is how we learn, and that is how we will see the efficacy and need of the system of Deen. The Quran declares right at the fundamental level, it says, Ma kana li basharin an yutiyahu Allahul kitaba wal hukma wal nubuwata summa yakulu lin nasi kunu ibadalli min dunillah. It is not possible that a man to whom is given the book, that is Al-Kitab, and Hikmat and Nubuwat should say to people, be you my followers rather than of Allah. And this is an extremely important permanent value which we should keep in mind, that one human being has no right to rule another human being. And that does not mean there should be then anarchy in the human world. It means that the laws of Allah should be followed. That is, the permanent values which are given within the Quran should be followed. And all these human beings who follow the book of Allah have to acquire those divine attributes which will help them to understand the system of Deen and then to implement it. An environment of fear, uncertainty, anxiety, and grief across the world, which is deliberately promoted by those in power. This is part of a well-organized propaganda using media. And this is another very important point for us as students of the Quran, that whatever is going on in the world, people who are at the helm of affairs, they do it deliberately because their minds are not guided. And unguided minds will always do that. And we should never be deceived by that. Now, next is background to the question of finding God. No one can deny this fact that the basis of religion is on belief in God. The name of God will change within different religions, but acceptance of his existence and belief in him will be the first condition everywhere. From this, the questions which necessarily arise are, what is God? What is he like? Why it is necessary to believe in him? What happens by not believing in him? What is the mutual relationship between man and God? And it is important for us to understand it because these kind of questions do arise in the minds of those who are not exposed to the guidance of the Quran. These questions are, as is obvious, very important, very difficult, and very sensitive. And since the time that the human consciousness has awakened, it has been busy making efforts in investigating to find a satisfactory answer. Because human beings have a rational mind and we question everything. Right from childhood, we can see children asking questions. And these questions need to be logically answered and addressed because human beings work better when they are convinced that the path they are following is the correct path. The Quran has also raised the edifice of Deen on the foundations of Iman in Allah, which is called Iman Billah. Therefore, these questions which are mentioned above also confront a student of the Quran. Because of the importance of these questions was also in front of the Quran, it has therefore provided answers to them with great detail and emphasis. But it is obvious that each and every individual can only comprehend these kinds of lofty, abstract truths according to his own personal vision and understanding. And we should keep in mind that we have that cognitive ability where we can understand abstract truths. Because without understanding them, if we only concentrate on the physical side, then our life becomes very animalistic. Next slide is human beings look for a deity. Living without it is impossible. And even those people who say that there is no God, that means that concept, that belief of no God becomes a deity in itself. So human beings need some kind of concept to go through this life. And the reason is that in nature, nothing remains in vacuum. Whenever there is a vacuum created anywhere, other forces come into it. If you traverse any period of human history and cast an eye on any part of the earth, you will find that there is one thing every place, every nation, and every era has in common. And that is that people will have devised some sort of being, either a tangible or abstract thing or an intangible perceptive power, in front of which they bow down, which they worship, and of whose anger or displeasure they are fearful, and whose pleasure they consider to be a reason for blessings and approval for themselves. And we see this being demonstrated in the religious domain, especially where people go into meditation or they go into prayers and carry out some kind of ritual practices, and they feel very satisfied. And if you talk to them, they do say that they felt very contented, very at peace with them. And if you point their direction towards the problems in the world, they tend to ignore them. Leaving aside the civilized and developed nations, if you go to such an island where no outsider has previously stepped, according to history, then no matter how different the population residing there may be in other matters, in this common issue, their practice too will be equivalent. The famous Greek historian Plutarch writes in this regard: in wandering over the earth, you can find cities without walls, without signs, without rulers, without palaces, without treasures, without money, without gymnasium or theater, but a city without temples to gods, without prayer, oaths, and prophecy. Such a city no mortal has yet seen and will never see. And this is a fact. Human beings cannot live life without having some kind of a faith, some kind of a belief, some kind of a goal in life. The next is the development of the idea of God over time. While such an awareness exists everywhere about such a power, its concept and details are different in every place. Within even one country, the God of one tribe does not match the God of another tribe. The God of the country is different from the God of another country. The deity of one nation is distinct from the deity of another nation. Until a short time previously, the thinking of one group of Western thinkers was that, and it is possible that there may still be supporters of this idea present there, when early man of the initial era observed that some such disasters occurred, for example, sudden changes in weather, storms and hurricanes, or epidemics of diseases, etc., whose causes and remedies were concealed from his eyes and his mind could not grasp them. Then there arose in his heart this idea that it could be that there were very great forces present behind these events which were not visible to him. And as a result, people then resorted to religion and prayers and these rituals because they were scared of it. They were fearful, and these rituals provided them some kind of temporary emotive satisfaction. In this way, the concept of God was born in the human mind. This concept varied in different countries according to their circumstances and conditions as time passed and man made continuous progress. This concept also evolved, and this way gradually that concept of God came into existence, which is presented by the higher religions of the world. This doctrine is called the evolution of the concept of God. And this kind of ideas came to those people who did not believe or who did not think that there is anything called revelation or wahi from Allah. And they tried to evolve or study their own way of looking at it, and they thought these greater religions somehow have got the same idea which evolved over a period of time. Now, next slide is repudiation of this evolution of the concept of God. But later thinkers countered this doctrine and asserted that the correct concept of God has always remained the same right from the very beginning. The question of progression and evolution in this simply does not arise, so much so that the modern famous historian Dr. Arnold Toynbee has written the following in his book titled A Historian's Approach to Religion. Professor Schmidt's research shows that the concept of the worship of God presented by developed religions is not a new concept which they have invented. The oldest religion of mankind was also this, which has been renewed by developed religions. Professor Schmidt's book, The Origin and Growth of Religion, from which Dr. Toynbee has quoted the above conclusion, is considered to be the best book on this subject in modern times. In this, he has noted in clear words that the concept of that higher deity which exists in the early social life of man was that very same concept which has been presented by the flag bearers of the monotheistic religions. And this is what the Quran says. Quran says that right from the start of arrival of man in the world, in different parts of the planet, revelation was provided to these human beings as a guidance through the messengers of Allah. Therefore, it can be stated with certainty regarding most of the oldest tribes of the human race that this was their concept about God too. Hence, the doctrine of evolutionary religion has been proven to be absolutely bankrupt in the whole field of sociology. Since the subject of our book is not to trace the history of the concept of our belief in God, we do not consider it necessary to elaborate further on this point. I left this sentence over here because if any one of us wishes to pursue it further, we can do our own research. There is plenty written on this aspect. Next slide is concept of the Quran. So that set the scene for discussing what is given in the Quran. For the purpose in front of us, it will suffice to say only this, that the Quran has informed us that ever since social consciousness awakened in man, the guidance of Wahi, that is divine revelation, commenced descending through the Anbiya from Allah. And this is another aspect which we can study through the books written by Allama Parvez, and particularly the book Human Self and Iblis, which deals with the aspects of revelation. The focal point of this teaching was the correct concept of God, and it is obvious that when the source of this knowledge, that is Wahi, was only one God, then this concept will also remain one from the beginning to the end and was only one. And that is an interesting point for us to take from today's presentation, is that if the revelation was the same and was from the same Allah, then it has to be consistent from the beginning till the end of time. And if we keep that in mind, then all the tampering which has taken place in different religions, this is man-made, because human beings tend to tamper the books of Allah. And that is where the Quran has a unique position, that it is tamper-proof. But what used to happen was that a messenger would come and would present this lofty and supreme concept about Allah with great clarity. After some time, this reality would disappear from the eyes of the people, and man, engrossed in his physical senses, would begin mixing the colors of his own thoughts into this clear and transparent concept of divinity. Because if we do not realize the importance of Allah's revelation and its impact on ourselves, then we take the things very lightly. We do not take these things seriously. And when we say the Quran's text is preserved, it means the original Arabic text is preserved. But we can see how much variation exists within these translations and various expositions. Sometimes he would make these things his God from which he was afraid and fearful. Sometimes into those things from which he had some expectations. Sometimes he would erect statues of those mental and imagined gods because of their greatness and holiness, and carve idols. Because once we start believing in wrong things, then gradually over a period of time, these beliefs become convictions. And all the successes somehow which we get from the man-made system, we start attributing to these gods which we have created within our own mind. When in this way the darknesses of superstition enveloped the human mind, then another messenger would come and deliver the pure concept of Allah to the people via wahi, and would inform them in clear words that it is the things of the universe which bow to man, not man to the universe. And that is a very powerful statement, that it is the things of the universe which bow to man, not man to the universe. Such potentials have been placed in him, as a result of which he can harness the things of nature and make use of these according to his choice. So human beings have a unique position on this planet by virtue of possessing this choice and intent, that everything is placed under their control. Next slide is concept of the Quran, continuing with the same. So much so that this whole universe and its different and contrasting images are, every one of them, standing with their hands tied before man in his service. Therefore, to bow down before these things and to conceive of them as masters and rulers means what? So we should never ever bow down before anything in the world other than bow down or be obedient of the laws of Allah. Thus, this process of wahi continued in this pattern and form until the human mind reached nearer to full adulthood. Then this virtuous and pristine, pure and transparent, lofty and supreme concept of Allah was given within the Quran in a complete form. And this heavenly book was preserved and protected for all times. And which, as I said earlier as well, and we have gone through this aspect previously as well, that it is the Arabic text which is preserved. Therefore, the correct concept of Allah, which Allah himself has detailed, is within the folds of the Quran in its original and true form, in which there is not an iota of adulteration by the human mind and is nowhere outside of it. And we can check it as well, but it is not a one-day's job. We have to study the Quran over a period of time and compare it with what kind of thoughts arise in our own mind, and also look at the system which man has created under relative values and the system to which the Quran is pointing our attention to be created within the permanent values. This is because no world religion of today can claim that the book which they call a divine book is word for word the same one that their messenger received from Allah himself. Hence, whichever individual wishes that he could obtain that concept about Allah, which Allah himself has detailed, he has no other option except to turn to the Quran for that. The purpose and intent of this book is to explain what is the concept of Allah which is put forward by the Quran. Next slide is the divine self. Now, this is something very interesting as well as very motivating. As far as the self of Allah is concerned, comprehending its form and reality, state and composition is not a matter within the grasp of the human mind. A finite mind can never even begin to conceive of an infinite one. And that is important, that the mind which is given to us to use it for our choice and intent and decision making is finite. Hence, finite cannot conceive something which infinite, but it can understand some of the facets of infinite. Leaving aside an immense concept such as Allah, modern philosophers and scientists tell us that time has no beginning and space has no limit. In other words, it is wrong to say that time began at such and such a moment and that some corner of the universe is the final frontier. And we can think about it as well. For example, once we go outside the domain of sun and earth, there will be no time. The time which is seen as serial time is because of the rotation of the earth, and that is what is producing day and night. Neither time started from some point, nor is there any final boundary of the universe. We are informed of this by philosophy and science. And initially, long time back, human beings thought there is only one universe. And now people are saying there are multiverses as well. So we do not know the extent of the universe in which our planet Earth exists. But if you exert your mind and try to imagine some space which is without a beginning or without an end, you will see that such a concept simply cannot be grasped by your mind. And it's worth trying. That if we try to think about this, then we will see that it is impossible to conceive something which has no boundaries, or time which has no beginning and no end. The more pressure you put on your mind, the sooner you will become uneasy. If this is the state of affairs regarding the concept of time and space, then how can the concept of Allah's self, who is the creator of time and space, come within the domain of human cognition? This is the reason why the Quran has not stated anything about the reality and form of the divine self. It has only informed us as to what his attributes are. And this is something great. Quran has made it very simple for us. And secondly, attached to this, Quran also says that the life will not end with death, and life will go beyond death as well. So some of the questions which cannot be answered with your present finite cognitive abilities may stand answered in the life of the hereafter, because Quran says that all your wishes will be fulfilled and there is far more with us than what you possibly can wish. Next is the divine attributes. And that is another important aspect of today's lecture, because on this then we will capitalize and build our subsequent structure of the system of Deen. The fundamental aspect of the great and unparalleled Quranic teaching is this, that the concept of Allah which arises before us according to these attributes, no higher, purer and more complete concept can be found anywhere else. The truth is that, as will be explained later, ascertaining the purpose and destination of human life itself is dependent on the concept of Allah. And it is infinitely, should I say, important that we understand this concept of Allah if we haven't come to grips with it. And if we have understood it, then we have to, through repetition, through reiteration, keep strengthening it. Whatever kind of concept an individual has of God, the life of that individual and the social map of that group or nation will be of the same kind. It was probably the Western thinker Kant who said that, tell me what type of God a nation has adopted for worship, and I will tell you everything about the culture and social structure of that nation. In fact, we can use this analogy, and through reverse engineering, whatever the Quran has talked about, shirk, kufr, munafiq, and other human beings who are all placed under one category of kufr, we can see that what kind of gods are residing in their heads. Indeed, it is obvious that when the concept of God which is presented by the Quran is unparalleled and without any visible example anywhere, then the purpose and destination which will be that of human life according to this concept, and the paths which will have been put forward by the Quran in order to achieve these will also be unparalleled and without any visible example, which is called the guidance of Wahi. This is the reason why the guidance which the caravan of humanity receives from the Quran cannot be obtained from anywhere else. And this is very important for each one of us as well, to convince ourselves through our own study, through our own observation, through our own evidence in the present day world, and by studying the Quran, that the guidance which is provided by the Quran simply cannot be obtained anywhere else, and human beings do not have guidance built within them. We have noted above that whatever type of concept of God, i.e., divine attributes, is in front of us, our life, individual and collective, will be of the same kind. Because it is the way we think, it is the way our belief system functions. If I believe about something, then I'm going to follow that belief, I'm going to do it. And for example, people who believe in fatalism or taqdeer, if we listen to them, that they will be relating everything to some kind of their own fate all the time. It is apparent from this that our life has a very profound and fundamental relationship with the concept of God. This is a very important point which it is essential to understand extremely well. Next slide is human life. One level of human life is that which is called the animal level. This life is one of purely physical existence, that is water and mud, whose purpose, like other animals, is preservation of self and procreation. And these two things we can see easily in our present day world manifested by everyone. The whole emphasis is on their own self-interest, their own vested interests, and to bring some children into this world, and that is what life means, and then accumulation of material benefits within the man-made system. The life of the self, development, concept of Allah from the Quran never crosses their minds. This life is the physical life of this world, and it ends with death. It is called the materialistic concept of life. But the Quran tells us that human life is not defined by physical existence that is animalistic alone. There is another thing contained within it which is called personality or human self or I or ego. The Quran denotes it using the term divine energy and calls it nafs. The Quran states, and breathed into him something of his ruh or energy, that is divine energy, which gives us the sense of identity as well as the ability to make choices. The human body keeps changing from moment to moment, whereas the human self is not affected by external influences. And if suitable development of the human self takes place, then man can live beyond his physical death and achieve immortality. There is a significant difference, however, between the way the physical body develops and the manner of self-development. The body grows by receiving substances from outside and incorporating them, in short, by taking. The self, on the other hand, grows by giving of its own abundance to others, because it is non-physical, and this is where humanity comes in. The self grows stronger by sharing its knowledge, wisdom, and other possessions with others. It is cramped when it keeps its riches to itself. The most rewarding activity in which it can engage is that of giving. And I've taken it from Islam, a challenge to religion. Continuing with human self, by denoting the human self using the term divine energy, the Quran has pointed towards a great truth. It has stated, Allah has a personality and man also has a personality. And this is an important thing for us to understand as students of the Quran, in order to not only recognize ourselves and our own personality, but also to pass it on to others. Because we cannot explain the concept of Allah to others unless we first point people's attention to their own self or personality. It should be clear that the self of man is bestowed on him by Allah and is not a part of the self of Allah. And this is another very erroneous belief in some quarters of religion, where people think that man is created in the image of Allah, and also that Allah is within themselves. All these concepts are wrong and not in line with the Quran, and also not based on evidence, because Allah's self is fully developed. Human self has latent potentials, and it develops through its own efforts. So it can never be part of the self of Allah, because a fully developed self cannot accommodate any undeveloped self. Even on a conceptual level, we can understand that. Personality is an indivisible unity which cannot be divided into parts. And when the human self is not a portion, i.e. part of the divine self, then this belief of, like Vedanta in Hinduism or mysticism, that the human self will ultimately merge with the divine self, and in this way the part will join with the whole as a droplet merges into a river is contrary to the Quran. And this is an observed fact as well, because each one of us have their own strong sense of identity. And that strong sense of identity cannot be mixed up with somebody else's sense of identity. It is simply impossible. So our sense of identity is indivisible. Wherever there is a personality or self, its basic characteristics will be the same. And this is a fact anywhere in the universe. Wherever there is any creation which is based on Allah's divine energy, which has self like us, that is, has choice and intent, will always meet this criteria. The personality of Allah is the most complete and highest self. Therefore, its attributes and traits are also the most complete and highest. The Quran denotes these as Asmaa Husna. These are the different aspects of this self. And Asma is the plural of ism, which means the attributes. And Husna is the extreme form of balance and beauty in attributes. So over here, what Quran is saying is that Allah has got all these Asmaul Husna, and it is our duty to recognize those and then aspire to manifest these, reflect these in our personality, so that our also self starts developing by emulating these. The human self in its miniature form in comparison with the divine self is finite. Therefore, its attributes are also finite in comparison with the divine attributes. Now over here, the beauty of the Quran is that it does not define an upper limit to that. And for example, in the case of the Messenger of Allah, it says that his character was khulqan azim, that it was the supreme attribute of that self, that it was fully developed as far as this life is concerned, which a human being can acquire through his own efforts and his own choices. And that means the Quran helped him to get that khulqan azim, and Quran does not say over there that you can't get it. For example, in the case of the Messenger Ibrahim, it says that he was an ummah in himself. So we should never ever degrade ourselves and put some kind of an upper limit in terms of becoming good, in terms of becoming righteous. Our efforts should be to become as much righteous as possible so that we can get the help of Allah as a collective entity being part of Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen. But at the same time, all those attributes in finite form are present in it, which are termed Asmaul Husna in relation to Allah, accepting those attributes which are related to Allah's infiniteness. Next is, in the self of Allah, His attributes manifest their glory in their completest form. In the human self, these attributes are present as realizable possibilities, or in a latent, potent or dormant form. And this is the starting point. The manifesting or actualizing of these is the purpose of human life. This is in essence what is termed as development of the human self. Next point is, it is obviously necessary for a self which is at a lower level that it should keep some higher self as a standard in front of it for its accomplishment. And this is a powerful statement of fact based on evidence. If we look around, we will see that all human beings who are living life without the help of the Quran will always have some human personality in front of them, or some kind of material benefits in front of them, or their own desires as their own guide. And that is why sometimes people say that we should follow our conscience, we should follow our own goal, we should follow our own inner call. Whereas Quran says that you should keep the highest standard, that is the infinite self of Allah with all His attributes as our model. And we can imagine that if we start following that model using the Quranic light, to what heights of eminence and loftiness we will achieve right in this world, just like the Quran says, khulqun azim. If man does not have such a standard in front of him, then he can never say with certainty and assurance that his self is developing. And that is another important point. It has to be as an external standard. It should not be our own inner desires or justifications through which we say that I'm judging myself. No, I'm judging myself using the Quranic criteria. And if it is, then to what extent? In fact, this is also possible. The development of his self, which the Quran calls tazkiyah nafs, is not occurring at all. Because if we are not using an external standard, then this tazkiyah nafs simply cannot take place, because we are using our own relative values, our own desires. And human desires can justify anything. While he is absorbed in this self-deception, the development of his self is taking place. So once we acquire these divine attributes within our own self and start reflecting it, the way we act, the way we think will become an evidence in itself if we use the Quranic criteria. Hence, it is essential for man that he should keep the divine attributes in front of him as a standard for the development of his self. It is for this very reason that the Quran has explained these divine attributes with such detail and clarity, beauty and proportion, so that there remains no doubt or misgiving, ambiguity or vagueness for these to become a standard for a human being. As these attributes continue to manifest in the human self, he, in the words of the Quran, is colored in the colors of Allah, or he continues achieving nearness to him. And there is a verse in Surah Al-Baqarah regarding this. The next slide also on human self. The display of these attributes in the human self is not such a matter about which no one else can have any knowledge of. The manifestation of these attributes occurs through the character and conduct of man, which presents itself in a tangible and concrete form in front of everyone. This is essentially what is known as the character of man. Bear in mind that according to the Quran, the highest character is the eminence of humanity. There is no concept of spirituality or ruhaniyat other than this. In the Quran, there is no mention even of the word spirituality. It has been stated even about Rasulullah himself that he was the possessor of khulq azim, i.e. holder of the highest character. Next point is keeping the divine attributes as a standard in front of oneself and declaring the manifestation of these in oneself as being the purpose of life is called Iman in Allah. And that is another important point, because after وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ, that is rejecting the man-made system and then coming to Allah, then we should start manifesting these attributes in our personality gradually over a period of time using the Quran, not only individually but collectively as well. And this is the purpose of this platform, so that we become educated and trained and then carry out self-development in our own time. Next point is the human self is received by every individual from Allah, but it is received in an undeveloped form. The human self will be strengthened by whichever deed of man is according to the Quranic program. Whichever is contrary to this will result in weakening and degradation in it. This is called the law of requital. So that means by manifesting and reflecting these attributes within us through our own efforts, through our own decision making, we are making ourselves fitting into the program and scheme of Allah, which is to create the system of deen for the good of whole of mankind in the world. And this point is very important in terms of bringing up children as well. The children who come to the families, we should look at them that they possess certain latent potentials, and it is our duty to, while we are training ourselves, educating ourselves, developing ourselves, we also help them to develop themselves and grow into mu'mineen so that they can take over the responsibilities in the future of the system of deen. We have to convince ourselves for that, and obviously we cannot convince them unless we are convinced our own self by acquiring a new personality, a new self in the light of the Quran. The effects of these deeds become apparent in this world as well as in the life after death. Therefore, the meaning of Iman in the human self means having Iman in Allah, Iman in His law of requital, and Iman in the life of the hereafter. And we can look at these 5 points are covered in verse 2, Surah Al-Baqarah 177. Basic attributes of the self. It is apparent what the fundamental relationship between Allah and man is, and therefore how important it is to have the divine attributes before us in their true and unadulterated form. And once we go through these divine attributes briefly, we will see that how to manifest these within our own self. The essential consequence of having Iman in Allah is of man having Iman in the existence of his own self. And that is another very important point from today's presentation is we have discussed it previously as well, but there is no harm in repeating it because we tend to forget as human beings, which takes him far higher than life at an animal level. Animals do not have self because they cannot make any choices. This is the fundamental difference between the Western materialistic, that is mechanical concept of life, who think that the life ends with death and once our brain is dead, we are dead, and the Quranic concept of life, and it is due to this very difference that the paths of both diverge completely from each other. And that is another point, because some people who have come to the Quran, even they think that there is some kind of an Islamic system in the West. They should be, if they study the Quran and the system of Deen, they will see that it is 180 degrees opposite. Different paths as well as different destinations. Hear this once again, that for the person who does not have Iman in his own self, his Iman in Allah means nothing. And I will repeat it, hear this once again, and we should be very convinced based on evidence our own self. We should never keep it vague in our mind that even if I have not understood, doesn't matter, we should discuss it with others who have understood this point. Hear this once again, that for the person who does not have Iman in his own self, that is, he does not know that his self exists. He does not know his own sense of identity. He doesn't know how his self is being affected by his choices and decision making. Then essentially it is impossible for him to have Iman in Allah. His Iman in Allah means nothing. Though every personality trait is significant in its own place, two among these are such that they can be declared as being fundamental, i.e. freedom and independence. Independence means not to be dependent on another with regards to oneself, i.e. to remain established by oneself without any external support. In Quranic terminology, this is called samadiyat. The second one is, and freedom, which is called hurriyat, means to be the possessor of the freedom to choose and of the ability to make decisions. Allah, who is an absolute self and complete in infinite form, is, and know Allah is free from all wants and worthy of all praise. And the word come over here is Hamid, which means it is not a praise the way human beings praise each other and use compliments for each other. Over here it means we know that Allah called himself as Rabbul Alameen. Rabbul Alameen means that through the system of Rububiyat, he has taken the responsibility of sustenance and growth and nourishment of every being in the universe. And in the world, that is where human beings live, this responsibility is carried out by Mu'mineen on his behalf. But means of sustenance have already been provided on the planet Earth. For your Rabb is the sure accomplisher of what he plans. So over here, Rabb is pointing towards Rububiyat. So in order to accomplish his plan, as noted in the Quran, it is the responsibility of Mu'mineen to become part of his plan, his scheme, and then see how things fall in place. Next is basic attributes, the same slide. This means that in him the attributes of independence and freedom are infinite. As far as freedom is concerned, Allah is the master of absolute power and limitless authority. And from here we should reduce this and become motivated that under the system of Deen, we will also have independence and freedom, a total independence and freedom. No other nation will be able to influence that nation which is implementing or managing the system of Deen. But despite this, he has himself imposed some constraints on his powers and controls, i.e. self-imposed limitations. For example, the Quran states, he has inscribed for himself the rule of mercy, that is the rahmat. That is, Allah will always help people, human beings, to grow themselves, to nourish themselves, to develop themselves if they follow his laws. Allah has made the rububiyat of the things of the universe his duty because he has created them. If he has created them, he has set destination and goals for them. And for all finite beings, there is the recirculation, or as they call it, the rebirth, and all that biological cycle exists. But in the case of man, once the body dies, his self, being based on divine energy, which possesses choice and intent, is going to go forward. And that also follows laws, and Quran calls it Sirat-e-Mustaqim, i.e. to provide sustenance and nourishment to them. See, this is a constraint, but by these kinds of constraints, no aspersion is cast on the freedom that is hurriyat of this self. It does not become subservient to another by this. Obedience to external imposed constraints is known as subservience. Obedience to self-imposed constraints is not called bondage. For example, in our own case as well, if, for example, we make a decision and resolve that every morning we will go out and do a walk to have a good health, that is not a constraint imposed on us by any external being, but we have done it at our own, through our own volition. Same goes for Allah. Allah has created certain laws and then he obeys those laws himself. So he is a law unto himself. If you reach some place at a specified time by command of another, then this is servitude. However, if you are punctual of your own accord, then this will not be servitude, but will be called being principled. So it is the beauty of it that all of us have to reflect these things within our own personality, because a strong personality always lives up to its commitments. Whatever agreements it makes, it must live to that. If it fails to do that, that means it is a weak personality. This imposition of limitations by Allah himself on his absolute powers is the demonstration of a great truth. This means that Allah does not use his powers and forces like an absolute dictator, rather uses these according to laws and procedures. So whatever is going on in the universe, we can look at it using the Quranic lens and we will see there are laws working everywhere. And wherever the laws are broken, there is also a law that the consequences of breaking a law will appear. And laws and procedures mean that whatever the demand is of circumstances in the universe, the same kind of divine attribute manifests. And this is a beautiful sentence over here, and we will look into it, that what kind of divine attribute we will, as human beings, bring out whenever we face a certain problem. Now, what kind of a human being is required by Allah for his program? What I've done over here is that I've drawn a short schematic indicating that how divine attributes and permanent values come together in the case of human self-development and what kind of a personality should emerge out of it. Over here, Allah's program, there is for the human world. And the blueprint of this program, as we know, is given in the Quran. And this is the Quran. And we need Iman first. That is, وَمَنْ يَكْفُرْ بِالطَّاغُوتِ وَيُؤْمِنْ بِاللَّهِ. Concept of Allah plus divine attributes play a key role. Though we are addressing these issues later on, but we know right from the beginning, once we started treading on this path, that what concept of Allah means and how to display these divine attributes. And adding it to values, permanent values, learning to apply to the system of deen. And we have gone through some of the salient permanent values. And adding these with a self based on divine attributes and its functioning within the permanent values, emergence of a Jamaat-e-Mu'mineen, which has acquired the character based on the Quranic conviction of 100% reliance on what is contained in the book of Allah with respect to establishing the system of deen. So what this schematic indicates is, or points to us, is that concept of Allah plus divine attributes and learning the permanent values and learning how to act within these permanent values. We come to this conclusion and we acquire that self which fits into the program of Allah for the human world. And Quran helps with that and guides us on this path. Thanks for your time and for sharing this today. Please feel free to share it with your contacts. You may like to subscribe for future talks related to the Quranic system of deen.